If I can ask the speakers for the next panel session to come up, that's Christina Modé, Thomas Insua, who I saw at the back, and George Marshall, please, if you could, please. If you take a seat initially, thank you. Great, thank you all. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about what the research tells us about this initiative. There's, I think, fair to say, some tension around system change and personal lifestyle change and how the two intersect, or if they can be complementary to each other. And so we have some wonderful experts here to talk about that. So the research behind this initiative, and also, as was mentioned earlier, how to communicate this message to our respective faith communities. So we're going to spend 30 minutes discussing that. We have Christina Modé, who's the Director of Sustainable Lifestyles at the Center for Consumption and Production here in Germany. We have Thomas Insua, currently based in Boston. You still there? Yeah? Okay. Thomas Insua, who's the Executive Director for the Global Catholic Climate Movement. And we have George Marshall from Oxford. There's a small little Oxford team gathering here. I'm from Oxford. We have Laurie from Oxford. I don't know. Anyone else from Oxford? Oh, okay, just the three of us. So George is the co-founder and the director of projects at Climate Outreach. And George has done significant work around communicating climate change to faith-based communities. So at first, I'll ask Christina to please come up. Thank you.
This one? Okay, sure. Now it's better. So hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here, and I already enjoyed the discussions this morning, and I'm looking forward to more discussions. I have to make a small correction. I'm not the director of the CCP. I'm the team leader of the team Sustainable Lifestyles. And I did not bring a photo of my family with me today. That would, of course, have been very nice. I also have a family with 2 children. And I have to say that my children are a very big motivation for me to work in this area, because I do not want to face them later in 10 or 20 or 30 years and having them confronting me to say, why didn't you do anything? So I want to be able to say, I tried, at least. Okay, and before I delve into the topic of today, I want to talk about a little bit about communities and how they can work towards mainstreaming sustainable lifestyles. I would like to make a very, very short introduction to CCP. To those of you who don't know us, we were founded in 2005 by the UNEP and the Wuppertal Institute. And now we are totally independent, working with projects in the area of sustainable consumption and sustainable production. We like to think of us as a think and do tank. That means that we do a lot of research projects, but we want to try to implement the research and the know-how that we gather in these projects in tangible implementation projects. So these are the areas that we work in. We want to achieve a good life for everyone. And we do that by working with business models and entrepreneurship, with business, product services and infrastructure, and my team that looks at sustainable lifestyles and very much on habits and behavior and how to change these. So in an essence, what CCP is working on is to mainstream the good life through working with behavior and behavior change and looking at ways to enable people to behave more sustainable. And as the name suggests, collaborating, we do so by working with different relevant groups in society. So we work with academia and research, with businesses, policymakers, and NGOs and citizens. And today I'm going to talk about this left upper hand part, the NGOs and citizens, communities. And I would like to ask why the communities are so important. Well, actually, we've heard a lot about that this morning already from the previous speakers. But I also like to emphasize that it is important because the policy decisions that are taken at events such as the COP here in Bonn, they need to be implemented at a local level in local communities. And also there is something which you may have heard of called the rebound effect. So even if you have very good policies and you enable, for instance, the installation of homes to save energy, it doesn't help very much if you have the window open all the time. So communities have a very important role to play by, as Kate said, also trying to practice a sustainable behavior with citizens. And also, if we really want to stop climate change and achieve a more sustainable society, I believe that we need to use all approaches and all strategies that are available to us. And that means that it's not just enough to work with business and look at more and new efficient production processes and work with policies and policymakers to have more and better policies, but also to work with consumers and the consumption pattern, and thus with the behavior of end consumers. So here you see some community initiatives for sustainability. I mean, there are a lot of initiatives out there. Not all of them are looking into sustainability topics, obviously, but you may have heard of these here on the slide. I'm not so sure that I would call the voluntary simplicity movement a community movement, because it's basically consists of individuals that have chosen to lead a more simple life for different reasons that are personal to themselves. Although I have to say that environmental motivation is a very important reason for them. But you may have heard of transition towns. This is a global movement, although it started small, I think about 13 years ago or something, 10, 15 years ago. And the idea, the goal of the transition town is to become completely independent of oil, and also to localize the economy as much as possible. And their strategy is to start at a small scale, so they often do small type of activities in the beginning, like planting trees or encouraging neighborhood support and so forth. And then we have the eco-village communities. They have a slightly different approach. They want to become completely autarkic when it comes to energy consumption and also to some extent food consumption. And they do this often by designing more or less new villages from the scratch in a very participative and co-creative process. There are also other types of eco-villages from being made from existing rural villages and communities, or urban communities as well. But I think they are mostly known for the design and building of new villages. So they were examples of rather global movements, but they're also, of course, very, very local community initiatives. And this is an example of an initiative that we have identified in a project of ours, where we look at strategies and best practice cases and innovations to address health, environment, and equity at the same time. So this initiative is based in Prague, and not only looks at how to build a community garden and compost and produce food locally, but they also try to engage socially disadvantaged people in their activities. as a work training program. So they try to address the environmental side by reducing transport for food, but also look at more healthy diets with more vegetables and less meat, but also look at the equity side to try to engage with unemployed people, for instance. This is another very local initiative, and I'm showing you this just to show you the variety of the different community initiatives that they're out there. So this is one in Portugal where bicycles or cyclists are encouraged to ride their bike in the city, which may not be so pleasant in Portugal. Maybe there's not so much infrastructure for bicycling. So this initiative helps and gives tips how to move around safely on the bike. And I think for this type of community initiative, one thing is common for them, and it's very important, and that is to have a common vision for what you want to achieve. And this is something that we tried to do in a project a few years ago, where we looked at a local community. We sat down with the people and experts in this community to try to vision how life could look like in a more sustainable way in the future. And then from that, trying to find pathways to reach this sustainable future. And this is a similar idea. It's another project of ours where it's the project that I just mentioned, where we look at strategies and innovations to address the three different topics of environment, health, and equity. And for this project, we also developed 4 different scenarios. So these are positive scenarios, trying to show what life could look like if you lead it in a sustainable way in 2040. And the left-hand side on the axis would equal the more communicative choice, where the scenarios are more collective. So if you look at some success factors and barriers for communities for sustainable lifestyles, I think one of the most important that I already mentioned is to have a common vision. And this vision has to be developed in a very participatory and co-creative way. I also think it's very important that people have a sense of ownership of the initiative, so that they have a responsibility for the initiative to reach its goals also. And for sure, they have to have the feeling that they have the ability to change something also, because if they engage in something and then ultimately nothing happens because there needs to be a policy change or some other kind of a change, then it's very frustrating, and the initiative will not be very successful. I think one thing which is also very important is that you have a feeling of connectedness, and I think this is also probably a reason why community initiatives on sustainable lifestyles haven't spread as much as they perhaps should have, because, I mean, some of them are very good, but it's because as we sit here, we can't really see many of the challenges that our consumption has as a consequence. As the colleague from Fiji was saying, that they have no choices. They really live the climate change, whereas we here, we don't really see it that much. And I think also for a community initiative, you need to have a feeling of connectedness. And also, I think what is very, very important is that you have access to gatekeepers in that community. So if you want to sit down and co-create and develop a participatory vision, then you also need to have access to these gatekeepers. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to reach out. Barriers are, I guess, the the other side. So if you don't have the ability to change, if you don't have disconnectedness and don't have access to gatekeepers, then obviously it will be difficult. But also lack of financial resources, and also lack of exchange between the communities, because there are so many different communities out there, and they are partly reinventing the wheel, and it would be good if they have more exchange between the communities. And then finally, also that sustainability children's challenges, they are very, very distant to many initiatives here in Europe and the Western world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas.
So good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, and I'll share a little bit about our work engaging the Catholic community. I was asked by Fletcher to share a little bit about how we are trying to figure out how to communicate this need to have sustainable lifestyles in our faith community, specifically in the Catholic community. So our work, of course, is deeply rooted in the Laudato Si encyclical of Pope Francis, which you might have heard. Pope Francis released this wonderful teaching document, which is the highest level of teaching in the Catholic Church, in 2015. And all of our work is deeply rooted in that document, given its significance for Catholics. But at the same time, something really important for us is to remind Catholics that this is not an innovation of Pope Francis. There are some people and many Catholics that tend to say that this is something that Pope Francis came up with. And a big part of our work is reminding them that this has been an integral part of Catholic social teaching for a very long time. Popes have been talking about this issue for many decades. John Paul II enshrining it in the Compendium of Catholic Social Teaching in the early 2000s, and Pope Benedict being the Green Pope. So it's not an innovation from Pope Francis. That's something we like to insist. And of course, there's the biblical mandate that we all know, and St. Francis of Assisi, 800 years ago, kind of being this model of integral ecology, how Pope Francis calls him. So yes, our work is deeply rooted in Laudato Si, and here we see, in terms of trying to motivate a behavior change, what we're trying to do here is, yes, try to instill those values in the Catholic faithful that will motivate that deep concern for creation, that deep concern to care for nature, and drive and commit, undergo those behavior changes that are so urgently needed. So here there are couple of key values in Laudato Si. Of course, this is a very short talk. We could talk for many hours or days about Laudato Si, but there are a few key values that we're trying to instill and communicate to our faith community, and many of them are, of course, shared with other faith traditions. Their concepts. First, the concept of our common home. You know, the tagline of Laudato Si is on care for our common home, trying to remind the faithful that Earth is our common home, is a common home. It's not just a planetary system with geophysical systems interacting and blah, blah, blah. It's our common home. So we are really trying to work with this concept of solidarity that is so important for Catholics, trying to remind us that we are one human family sharing this common home. That's something we're working on very strongly. Then we're working a lot on the concept of a culture of care versus vis-a-vis a throwaway culture. You might have heard Pope Francis talk about the throwaway culture, which is a concept that he's been using repeatedly and has become a very important concept for Catholics. That, I mean, this throwaway culture, you see it, I mean, on the environmental front. I mean, how we throw away goods and pollute, but we also see this throwaway culture in how we treat fellow human beings, the poor, the aged, the unborn, etc. And so we're working a lot and trying to tackle this paradigm of consumerism that we're seeing everywhere, that is at the root of this crisis, that is, or partly at the root of this crisis, trying to tackle that consumeristic paradigm we're getting imposed from corporations and the way this economic system works, trying to propose instead a culture of care against this throwaway culture. Then, of course, this trying to remind us about creation being a gift, really trying to, motivate behavior change by taking care of this gift that God has given us. So trying to really insist on that as a motivation for change. Then another concept that is really important in Laudato Si, and we're working a lot to kind of express and communicate, is the one of justice. As we know, and maybe George can talk afterwards, I heard your work on justice and fairness and so on, but justice is a very key value for us Catholics, and of course we're playing with the different dimensions of justice and or solidarity here, playing out first against our children and grandchildren. Family is such a deep value for Catholics and Christians, well, everybody actually, but it's really many committed Catholics are all about family, right? Protecting the family. So here we have a very powerful angle and motivation for change. Do this for your children, do this for your grandchildren. That of course resonates with everybody, but it really resonates with Catholics as well. Then of course, justice towards the poor. Social justice has been a very important issue for Catholics, and I'll speak about that in a minute, especially in the global South, how that plays out. I'm from Argentina. So justice towards the poor, of course, a deep motivation for change. I think this is something we share with many faith traditions about caring for the poor, protecting the poor. So the motivation for behavior change, again, being rooted in this need to care for the poor and protect the poor. And of course, lastly, there's this last dimension about justice towards creation, other fellow creatures. This is, of course, something that does not resonate that much among Catholics, unfortunately. I know that in the East, the Eastern tradition, that resonates much more, but that's something that is there in Laudato Si, trying to criticize this anthropocentric paradigm, but that's something that still doesn't have that much traction in the Catholic community. And lastly, I think this is something really important that we should be discussing here, is the faith community's ability to transmit hope and inspire hope. As we know, the climate crisis is so massive and huge, and things are not looking good, and patterns are not changing at the speed we need, that a lot of people are losing hope. So I think here, both us in the Catholic community and other faith traditions, a big part of our work for motivating change and behavior change is inspiring hope, inspiring that change is possible, that we can turn around this curve of growing greenhouse emissions. And we will never achieve that if people don't believe there is hope, that there's a chance for change. So a big part of our work here is trying to communicate this hope that we can turn around this issue. And this, of course, for us Christians, by definition, our Christian faith is it's a faith of hope. We're people of hope. We believe that after death there's life, after the cross there's resurrection. So this is something that I think we should be spending most of our time, is trying to inspire this hope. Specifically about the global South, given I'm from Argentina, and also Fletcher asked to share a little bit about how this plays out in the global South. Myself, as mentioned earlier, the social justice concept is really important for us. And for the Catholic Church in the Global South, the concept of social justice is super important. It's something that really resonates with the Catholic Church. Myself here, I spent about 10 years doing social justice work in slums of Buenos Aires. And actually, I'm one of the late converts. Actually, you could say a lot of people in the Catholic community, even Pope Francis himself, everybody, I mean, Pope Francis was, or Jorge Bergoglio, was an icon of social justice back in his days as Archbishop of Buenos Aires. But Argentinians didn't think of Bergoglio as somebody who spoke about ecological issues. They thought of him as somebody who spoke about social issues and social justice, his concern for the poor. And it was when he made that connection, this famous quote, which hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, connecting these two crises, the social crisis with the environmental crisis, that really resonated with a lot of Catholics. Myself, and this actually is something that comes, a concept that comes from Leonardo Boff, a Brazilian theologian. So anyways, and myself, it was when I went to the Philippines in 2013, right after Typhoon Haiyan, and I saw the devastation of Super Typhoon Haiyan, where I really connected the dots between social justice and climate justice, and that drove me all in. I had been following things, but in the Global South, our problems are the kids in the slums who cannot eat, or the massive social illnesses we have all over the place. So we had, my perception was, I have no time for these issues. This is a luxury for the Global North. When I made that connection, that this is about social justice in the end, that really motivated me to personally to start working intensively on the issue. But anyways, I know that here this is a Global South nuance, and that doesn't necessarily work in the Global North or in parts of the Global North. So anyways, to conclude, I think here a key thing will be communicating hope and the urgency. Here, if we want to inspire behavior change with the speed we need, we really need to get out the message of urgency. Laudato Si, and we, people of faith, I think, have a important role in trying to translate the urgency that the scientists are communicating, to translate it into more easier to understand terms. So given the huge size of our constituency, if we get that message delivered, that would be huge. But again, always matched with hope, a big emphasis on hope and the possibility for change. So well, thank you very much, and looking forward to discussing more.
Hello, hello. Oh, nice. How do you do, everybody? My name's George Marshall. I work with, as you've heard, Climate Outreach. We're a charity based in Oxford. We've got a team of about 12 people. And we're amongst the leading specialists in Europe on communicating climate change. We are advisors to many people, many of the large environmental organizations. Also, we've been doing some work for the IPCC. We've been advising the World Bank, various governments. We like to work between universities, environmental organizations, big institutions. And I'm absolutely delighted to be working with all of you and networks of faith as well. Our work, the research, shows that climate change is extremely challenging. And I wrote a book where I interviewed some of the world's leading experts in psychology, and they said, "Whew, this is a tough one." This puts together some of the things which are really, really hardest for us to talk about and to accept and to think about. But the research takes us in a very clear direction. The first thing is that information is important. Data, the science of climate change is very important, but of itself, it does not change people's attitudes or their behavior. So the science informs, but it does not direct. It does not swing people. What does work for people is when they perceive a narrative or a story which is shaped in their image, which is built on their values and speaks to their identity. Also, what is important is that people have a sense and are motivated ultimately by a joy of belonging. It's really, we have to keep saying this. What makes 400,000 people want to march on the streets of New York, as they did, to protest and demand action on climate change, was a joy of belonging. We cannot be isolated. We have to find ways that we can all come together. And I think for me, this is fundamentally a right. People have a right to know about this issue. And they have a right to know about it in a way that speaks to who they are, what they care about, their values, and that fits with their identity. That is a right. It is a right which is enshrined in the international climate change legislation to Article 6, requires governments to engage with their own communities and their own people. That right is challenged in part by the fact that people do not talk about climate change. And that's one of the issues we need to address in this project, that there is a collective silence. Repeatedly in surveys, half, 2/3 of people say that they cannot remember ever having had a conversation about climate change with anyone. We have to find a way that we break that silence, that we make people talk about this. So we were delighted when we were approached at the run-up to the Paris negotiations by Greenfaith, by a coalition of organizations that were working together to find a multi-faith narrative and language for mobilizing people up to Paris. And we did a number of interviews, we ran focus groups, discussion groups with each of the 5 main faiths on this. And our discussions always started with, what makes you proud of who you are? What makes a good Muslim? What makes a good Hindu? What gives you that sense, that joy of belonging, that identity that makes you special? Because we knew that the language around climate change had to be built from that point on. So of course we were very, very excited indeed to be part of this other project, working. The joy of belonging extends to the many friends I've made through this work, and it's lovely to be working with you all again. And we will be having a similar approach. We will be asking people of the different faiths, what makes it special for who you are, and how does that relate to your actions, to your identity, to your behavior? Some of the findings we found we can also, in that previous piece of work, we can carry forward to this new project. So we've heard some of this already, that people engage with climate change as a gift. The world is a gift, and that climate change is damaging that gift, and the responsibility we have to the divine, to the creator, to the gods, to the people who gave this to us. With a gift comes a responsibility. Also, language about things being out of balance came through very, very strongly in these discussions. The sense that there is a natural balance, that there is a relationship between us and the world and the divine, and that this is threatened and upset by climate change. Because the reason we take action is not to save the planet or to save the polar bear. It's actually to express who we are, to become closer to God through our action, and to put the world straight, to put that balance straight. So we will be carrying some of this learning through into this new project. We are very, very pleased to be designing the communications around this. And I wanted, in the last few minutes I have, to identify some of the challenges I think that we face in terms of talking about behavior. I mean, the first one is to say, wow, if communicating climate change is hard, getting people to change their behaviors is extremely hard. Many of the obstacles are the same. People have a strong tendency to push this thing away, to say, no, this is not me, this is them over there. No, this isn't now, this is something in the future. Of course, people find it hard to do things that they don't want to do. And the answers are very much the same, that the evidence now on behavior shows that actually the best way to affect people's behavior is when it is part of their values and their identity. I do this thing because it is who I am. Yeah? I do not beat my children because that is who I am. Yeah? This is respect for my parents or for my children, that love, that is a core and sacred value to me. And it doesn't matter, it does not affect that sacred value if people in another country don't respect their parents, or if my next door neighbor, does something, hits their children. For me, I don't do that because that is who I am. So we have to make these behaviors something central to who we are. The challenges, maybe 5 of them I have here. One challenge is obviously how do we take behaviors and how do we engage them and draw from the sacred texts which inform our faiths. And that is difficult, because although the texts have a lot to say about waste, about respect for the world and respect for each other, some of these specific behaviors are not well represented in texts which emerged thousands of years ago. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, flying. They are full of language about flying, but the flying is the right of the god or the gods, right? It's very hard to pin down some of these things, especially because many of these behaviors are built on love. Nobody intends to cause harm. If, for example, I fly across the world to sit with my sick sister in Australia, that is from a good place, but the effects of it can be bad. So we have this tension between good and bad, and how do we draw out from the ancient wisdom to build new language is definitely a challenge. A second challenge, we already heard about the rebound effect. There's a particular aspect of this called moral licensing, where people transfer a good behavior from one place to another. I am good in this way, and therefore it's okay if I'm a little bit bad over here. We see this very strongly with behaviors, that people, for example, will justify their flying because they recycle. Or I have to say, many of my friends in the environmental movement seem to fly all around the world all of the time, but feel very proud about the fact that they cycle to work and that they are vegan. I have my own tensions. I try not to fly, but I'm afraid I haven't moved on like Fletcher, and I still like my barbecue. So we all have our internal things and our little justifications. I say to myself, oh, it's okay, I'm good in so many ways, I can be bad in that way. This licensing, when we make this a moral issue, I tell you, this is what people will do, is they will start saying, I'm moral in this way, and I will transfer that. A third challenge, I think, is how do we reach people? I think we need a model of change, and this is going to be really challenging, for how do we get scale on what we're doing? Certainly, getting leading people speaking to their networks is a powerful form of communication. We still have to ask, how do we get that message from those leaders out to people? Some of you, I'm really pleased, will be doing interviews with me today, and we're going to capture some of your thoughts on video as a first step to creating tools and medium for reaching people. But it's not just going to be top-down. All of the experience with communications is communications has to work both ways, top-down and bottom-up. And between people, peer-to-peer, the people in the end who are most trusted are the people we know already, who are within our community and who are like us. So how do we get them engaging? A fourth challenge is how do we get people to feel that joy of belonging? Most behavior change campaigns in the past have been very, very isolationist. In Ireland, they even ran a campaign called The Power of One. What more disempowering language could you have than the power of one? And lots of messages have been, these are 10 easy things you can do in your home to save the planet. So even if people do them, and by the way, they don't, these approaches, and we've got good track record now, they don't work. But even if they did, how do I know that they're doing that? How does anybody know I'm doing that in my home? So how do we make these actions visible and shared between people so it feeds into that joy of belonging? How do we overcome the divisions, the big divisions around climate change within faith communities and along existing political and ideological lines? So, for example, Laudato Si was hugely influential with progressive left-leaning Catholics, but the research suggests that conservative Catholics said, Pope Francis, he's a good man, but I'm not with him on this. In other words, the political divisions were more powerful than the leadership message. So how do we overcome those boundaries? And I guess the fifth thing on this, the fifth aspect on this, is how do we evaluate success? How do we know that we're making that change if we have action which is spread all around the world, people taking a little action here, a little action there? How do we bring that together to show that this works? The final thing I would say is that the significance of this project is much wider than just what happens in this room or wider in the faith communities. If we're trying to struggle with this issue of how do we stop people from saying it's not me, it's them, it's not now, it's something in the future, everybody can take inspiration from faith movements which have been struggling with this. It is the core of the struggle. How do we help people to do something which is hard for them now, which will create uncertain rewards in the future? So I think the significance, I see this as an enormous opportunity to experiment with something new, and the implications of this could be much, much wider. I think we could really develop patterns through this that could inform the entire debate. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. Wonderful insights on research and best practice on how to engage communities. Very, very insightful. I just wanted to reflect on a couple of points. Christina, I loved the great examples you have about different communities and groups that are already doing this internationally. That was great. And the different tools and the barriers and so on to be aware of when engaging communities. I thought that was great. Thomas, your message of hope, about the importance of hope in this work is, I think a lot of us face burnout. Anyone here face burnout working in the climate space? One or two of us. So how to avoid, I see that as aligned to hope, is how do we maintain hope and avoid burnout as we do this work? And, you mentioned this, the Global South, Global North, and Reverend Bhagwan at the back also raised this. And, with that, I'm always reminded of the famous story of Mahatma Gandhi. When he came to London during the independence struggle for India, he was asked, Mahatma Ji, what do you think of Western civilization? And his famous response was, I think it's a good idea. And so when you talk about Global South, Global North, I'm always reminded of that story. And George, thank you for your wonderful insights. The 5 challenges I think are very important, and we'll be looking to address those as this initiative takes forward into the next step, which will be spoken about later on today. So thank you all for your time and your comments. I'm going to hand over to Neddy to introduce the next little session, which is going to be a spiritual pause before we head out to coffee. If the speakers want to head down, they're more than welcome to.